Welcome to Type Tune Tint. I'm Tom Kranz. Disowned by her mother, pregnant and married to an abusive man at age 19, Ava's life trajectory was crippled from the beginning. The next 40 years were marked by an amazing number of poor decisions, bad luck, addiction, and drug smuggling. Yet in the book Looking for Love, we learn that Ava finally sees the light, though it happened late in life. This true story was written over 2 years by today's guest, Susen Edwards, a former massage therapist and founder of a massage school who began her writing journey later in life as well. And I'm joined by Susen Edwards from her sprawling estate in Middlesex, New Jersey. Susen and I met in, September of 2025 at a little book fair that I've gone to for a few years, the New Providence Book Festival in New Providence, New Jersey. It's a little fair on a little chunk of grass next to a historic museum. And we had adjacent tents, and we got to talking, and it turns out Susan's husband, Bob, served in his local council like I did. So anytime you're a small town council guy and you meet another small town council guy, you instantly have stuff in common, and it's not all good. But we got to talking, and I got to know Susan a little bit. First of all, Susan, good morning. And are we all awake and happy?
I have my tea.
Yes. I had my first Diet Pepsi of the day. So we're here because of, number one, that we met, but I was intrigued by a couple of things. You basically came to writing relatively late in life, correct?
I did, yes.
So you had this incredible career. You met your husband. You were both massage therapists, which I thought was an unusual love story. You know, we met massaging people. And then you founded this pretty prestigious massage academy, as it were, in New Jersey. Tell us a little bit about that part of your life and that history.
Okay, well, actually, I had been a massage therapist for about 4 years. I was working at a chiropractic center, and my husband came in, my future husband came in as a patient, and he was very interested in the profession. So he went to the same woman I had studied with. And a couple of years later, we got married, and we realized that the education system for massage therapy in New Jersey was lacking. So we opened a school just kind of on a whim, and it took off, and we became the largest school in the state, the first to be nationally accredited. And it just, the timing was perfect. And massage was in its heyday back then. So we did very well. We educated probably a few thousand people over the years.
Does that school still exist?
Well, it did until the pandemic. And, because it's a hands-on profession, it kind of just, I think it folded. So we had sold it to someone, an individual. He then sold it to a large corporation, and I guess, the demand was not there. The pandemic, it hurt a lot of people.
I got it. Yeah, I have my good friend Don from Seattle. He was a massage therapist for a while. And it wasn't until then that I learned what's behind becoming a massage therapist. I mean, you're not just there beating on people's backs and whatnot. There's teaching, there's courses, there's certification, and it's actually a fairly big deal. I mean, to be certified actually means something.
Yeah. Well, New Jersey now has state licensing, and we were kind of we were very helpful in getting that started. One of our students was a paralegal, and she really helped us push the whole thing forward. So we ourselves are not responsible, but we did, get the momentum going.
Sure. So you have written, by my count, 3 books, correct?
Yes.
So we're going to talk mostly about your most recent book, Looking for Love.
Mm-hmm.
But you also wrote a book called What a Trip, and you wrote a children's book called Dr. Whisper and Nurse Willow.
Yeah.
And these are all fiction, although Looking for Love is actually a memoir about another person who obviously trusted you enough to write about her life in some detail. When did you was the children's book the first one you wrote?
It was, yeah. Excuse me. Actually, my husband had the flu, and he was in bed, and my 2 cats took care of him. And I thought, what a great story. So I turned my real husband into a little boy who has a tummy ache, and his cats become his doctor and nurse and bring him back to health. And then when the human doctor comes in, he's all better.
You were done with the massage school and that life,
Oh,
basically.
yeah. Yeah.
So you just decided one day, this is a cool thing. I'm just going to write this down and make it into a book.
Well, I had majored in English in college. I wanted to go on to be a creative writing teacher. And then life got in the way, as it does with so many people, and business happened for me. And throughout my business career, I did a lot of marketing, a lot of curriculum writing, all
Hmm.
that technical writing in education. And once I was done, I was like, okay, now I'm going to get back into the creative writing. I took a lot of courses, online courses, and started doing a lot of memoir pieces, a lot of little short stories. And Dr. Whisper is the only one of those that I've actually published.
I see. And then your second book was called What a Trip. Just give us a quickie synopsis of what this one's about.
Okay, What a Trip is a story about Fiona. She's my protagonist. She's a college student during the Vietnam War era. And she's trying to find herself, trying to find her place in the world. And she's caught in that kind of liminal space between the old era and what they called women's lib back then. So
Hmm.
she's fighting for her own rights. Her parents are trying to keep her down, get married, have a family, and she wants to strike out on her own. She meets a guy in college, and he is a journalism major, and he wants to go to Canada to avoid the draft. And the whole story is she going to go with him, or
Hmm.
is she going to stay and be the good girl and, become a teacher, housewife, that sort of thing?
Got it. And so that brings us to up to date with Looking for Love. This is a very juicy, very detailed novel, although it's based on the life of a real person. And this is a woman who came to you and said, would you please write my life story?" Essentially.
More or less, yeah. The background to the story, I knew the family for decades. And I knew that there was a missing daughter. I didn't know what happened to her. And I guess it was back in 2018. She just showed up back here in New Jersey. She'd been living in Arizona for about 25 years.
Hmm.
And she came over and we were talking. And I said, "So where you been for the last 50 years?" And she she started telling me this story, and I was like, "This would make a fabulous, fabulous book." And I said, "Do you know I'm a writer?" And she says, "No, I didn't." And she says, "But would you write my story?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'd love to." So we started because she flew back to Arizona, and we started weekly phone calls where I would interview her and she would tell me things. And after about a month, it just got too much for her because she was reliving all this emotional drama.
There's plenty of emotional drama. Whoa.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. I know. So she said, "I can't do this." So we put it aside. And I guess it was about a year later. And she came back. She says, "I'm ready now."
Hmm.
So we spent about a year back and forth with these interviews. We went chronologically through her life.
Were you recording her on a voice recorder or were you taking
I
notes?
type. I'm not a good auditory
Got
person.
you. Okay.
I just type very fast as
Okay.
she's talking.
Hmm.
And then I would write a section, send it to her for her approval. And we kept going. Got to the end of the story, and I said, "I'm going to have to change. This is too litigious. There's too many
Hmm.
people involved. I don't want to hurt anybody who's
Well, and
still
you don't
living."
want to
Oh,
get sued, right?
yeah, yeah. Most of the people are deceased, but
Right.
there are some who are still alive. So we changed the names, we changed the settings, we changed some dates, but the essence of the story and everything that happened in there is for real.
And here are some of the things that happened. And it's just, I got to halfway through and I said, wow, how much more bad shit can happen to this woman? It seemed like it was a combination of poor choices and just bad luck as well. But she was married three times or four,
Three.
three
And then she
times.
was in a long-term relationship.
Correct. And in each case, she hooked up with a man who either was abusive, was selfish, was narcissistic, was in some way just not good for her. She got addicted to drugs. She became an alcoholic. She got really involved because she followed this one individual in the drug trade, in actual drug dealing on an international basis. So far, so much so that she followed this one guy to Africa. Kenya, is that the real country, by the way?
Yes.
And they ended up in Kenya, and the whole big global operation that they were planning fell apart. He left her behind, this guy who she loved and who was Mr. Charisma. He basically betrayed her, left her to rot in a Kenyan jail for what, 3 months or something. Probably the worst single experience of her life. And then she gets out of jail and she goes back to the States and she looks for him. I didn't quite get that, but okay. So, and it turns out later on, this goes on for years, but it seems like the path for this was set in her early childhood by a mother who was also abusive, who marginalized her, who mocked her, who ultimately abandoned her and said, I don't care about you. I don't want to have anything to do with you. So here's this poor girl in her teens or whatnot. And I guess they say if that's what you know, that's kind of what you model in life. And she found out through therapy later on that that's pretty much what happened. Do I have it right so far? I'm doing an awful lot of
Yeah,
talking
you
here.
do. You do. Unfortunately, she, I mean, her mother, who I knew, um, and on the surface was a lovely lady, but I also knew the abuse that she had inflicted on her children.
Hmm.
Um, so Ava, who's my protagonist, she got pregnant when she was 19. She was dating an alcoholic who hadn't been abusive until that point. But she married him, and her mother said, "If you marry him, I'm done with you." But she married him anyway. He beat her up on the honeymoon pretty badly. I mean, she almost lost the baby.
Hmm.
She came home. She says, Mom, you were right. I made a mistake. I want to come home. And her mother said, You made your bed. Now lie in it. I'm done with you.
Hmm.
And she abandoned her pregnant daughter to an abusive alcoholic. And that was it. And she
Unbelievable.
denied that she ever had a daughter in
Yeah.
later years.
Yeah. How awful. And she was how old at that time? Was she a teenager or?
She was 19.
Yeah. I mean, geez. So, and then she ended up having two children in the book,
Yes.
and
Yes.
they essentially became estranged from her over the years because they ended up living with the first abusive father. And then I guess I kind of got the feeling that at least one of them kind of came around a little bit, but I don't know. Did they ever come around and have any kind of a reunion with their mom? No.
The younger one, no.
Yeah.
I think he was 18 was the last time she saw him. The older child, she has some contact with,
Hmm.
but not a real close contact.
So you spent a couple of years getting to know the intimate details of this person with
Yes.
her knowledge and her blessing, obviously. When you write so intimately about somebody who's had such a fraught life, what did you learn either about her or about human nature? Was there some bigger lesson that you learned after doing all that?
Well, the big lesson, I mean, for me, I have to tell you, it was so emotionally draining. Just at sometimes, hearing the story, especially when I learned that she was abandoned
Hmm.
over in the Kenyan prison. I mean, what a horrible, horrible thing to happen.
Yeah, and that was hard. It was about every bad thing you can think of being
Mhm.
in abandoned in a Kenyan prison. Pretty much was true.
Yeah. Um, but what I learned, and I think the whole message of this book, it is an adventure story. It is, I can't say it's a love story, but she got her life together. I mean, it's the whole purpose or the whole theme of the book is no matter how bad things can get, you can still turn your life around. It may take 50 years or whatever, but she really did. And I think that's pretty incredible that with all the trauma, all the abuse, all the drama that she had, she's sober now for, oh, I think about 35 years. She got a new career. She found her place in the Christian church, and she's living a good life, and she's helping younger women who are in similar situations.
Yeah, totally. So in the book, it seems like her turnaround and her kind of rebirth, as it were, starts in a church. She starts becoming, somebody says, Jesus will help you and save you and whatnot. But it turned out that that first church also disowned her because she ended up having a meeting. She met with this guy. Was it Nick who she met with? She met with
Uh,
the guy, or I guess it was,
I can't remember.
yeah, she meets with another guy who tells her that he's separated, but that marriage is over. Apparently the church finds out that she had a drink or something with this married guy, and they basically excommunicated her based on that. So that told me that this church was, maybe it was more a borderline, almost like a kind of a cult thing. They were very fundamental. I don't know, but she ended up in a church that she liked, and that was kind of the beginning of her new life. She got her cosmetology license, and then that's what she became, right? A cosmetologist.
Mhm.
And she became really good at it. And I think that's between that, the church, and a whole bunch of new friends. She actually, as you said, she started over again. I mean, it happened in her 60s, I guess, but better late than never, right?
Absolutely. And the fact that she lived to be that old,
Yeah, sure.
with all the drugs and the alcohol, that's another, I don't know if that was genetic or just, the fact that, because she was a dancer, a go-go dancer, as they used to call them. And I guess that kept her fit to a certain point. But I think it was her sheer willpower that kept her alive, kept her going, and eventually got her to a good place in life.
Yeah, and so by the time that all happens in like the last, I don't know, the last 20% of but the last maybe 50 to 60 pages. Up until then, it's just one horror story after another. And it makes you just think as a person, what, how can somebody, why does a person kind of seek out, all these bad people and all these bad circumstances? And as she learned from her therapist, who she finally went to in her 50s, I guess,
Mhm.
your parents, and I've heard this from other people, from other experts, your parents are probably your single most important influence in your life, for better or for worse. What you learn coming up, that stays with you one way or the other. And that's, I guess that's a cautionary tale. And it kind of says, if you recognize that in your life, it's never too late to go to a third party and get some help, I guess, right? Which she
Yeah,
did,
oh, yeah, which she did.
and it
I
helped
think,
her.
yeah, I think very early in the book, I just talk briefly about her early childhood, but her mother had married this man. He was in the service during World War II, and that was Ava's birth father. And he got killed, or he died in an army hospital of sepsis.
Hmm.
But when Ava's mother went to collect spousal benefits, she found out that her supposed husband had another wife and a whole other family. Yeah, so I think that was the beginning of the problems because she saw Ava as a memory of her first, marriage that
Sure.
wasn't a marriage. And I think she resented her. And I think that was probably the impetus for the whole
Ugh.
life thing. So,
Really horrific. As you said, it's a miracle that she survived, number one, but that she then was able to turn things around. And finally, I mean, she's still with us. The individual who you base this on, has had a quieter, more productive, kind of better life the last 20 plus years. At the book fair where we met, you were one of the speakers, and I actually sat in on your little seminar, and you spoke about writing memoirs, right? So writing basically a true story about either yourself or somebody else. And I wrote my last novel, Wreck and Return, is basically it's a fictionalized version of things I experienced in my life. And I recall, and I think we talked about this, I started writing that as a nonfiction memoir with like all the names. I did change the name of my town and the streets, but it hit me that, wow, I'm naming people and talking about cases, EMS cases, and people who I took to the hospital. Some of these people are still around. And I live in a small town, and everybody, and everybody knows the dead people and the alive people. So I kind of made a switch and made it fictional. Can you give us the highlights of kind of the concerns you had and the things that you had to worry about and pay attention to as you were writing this true story about this woman?
Well, of course, you want to protect the identities of the people because, especially well, your story too, which I absolutely loved, as an aside.
Thank you.
But, you know, it's not so much. I consulted with a legal attorney, a
Mm.
literary attorney, excuse me. And he said it's not so much the famous people, because there are a lot, I wouldn't call them famous, but people who have been in the public eye
Sure.
in your book. It's not so much about them because they have already been written about. It's, the little guy,
Mm.
your next door neighbor or somebody. You know, they're not in the public eye. They want to keep their identities protected.
Sure.
And whether you change, as you did in your story, I did also, you change the town, you change the dates, you change the names, you can change genders, you can change physical characteristics, speech patterns, anything that will keep their identities private.
So you can do that without changing the nature of the story, obviously, right? If all you're doing is changing names and dates and kind of the superficial things, the story still lives.
Yes, yes. Unless there's parts of the story that are so obvious that they might really hurt someone.
Did
And
you
then
come
you
up?
kind of manipulate that.
You mentioned that at one point, Ava, your subject, basically shut down, and she said, "I can't do this anymore." And then you put it
Mhm.
aside for a while. Were there separate instances or stories or portions of her life when you guys talked about it when she said, "Don't write about that. Don't use that."
No, because I think anything that she wanted to keep private, she didn't even mention.
Okay.
So we just went through the story. There's a book called The Underground Empire. I don't have it here in front of me, but it was written in the 1980s. And it was a journalistic overview of the South Florida drug trade in those years. And she is one of the minor characters featured in
Hmm.
that book. So when I read that, it corroborated what she had told me.
Hmm.
So I knew that, that part was true. I knew, and I investigated, used newspapers.com to do a lot of research. And so, in addition, that's the other thing, in addition to her interviews and, my writing the story, I researched everything. I corroborated
Really?
as much as I could, sure.
Yeah, that's important. So I wrote one nonfiction book some years ago, and I found it really important to do just that because
Mhm.
people read nonfiction, they expect it to be true and accurate. But if you're writing a memoir about somebody, even somebody whose identity you're changing, I think as a writer, you feel the same way, right? You want to make sure that it's right.
Oh, yeah. And not so much in this book, but like in What a Trip, because that was that whole Woodstock era. Music featured quite a bit in that story, and every song that I mentioned, I made sure that it had come out within the time frame
Oh yeah.
of that I was writing. So all those little details, because you get somebody reading your book who knows the subject
Yeah,
matter.
they'll know right away if there's bullshit
Yeah,
in there.
yeah, and they'll
Yeah.
be like, "Oh, this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
ridiculous." So,
Yeah.
and I'm
Was
one of those people. So
was What a Trip based on a real story also? Based on a real person
there
also?
are pieces of that are uh, true. I mean, there's a few things in that story that happened to me, but overall, the story is fiction.
what is your, I always like to ask writers, what is your actual physical process when you sit down to write? Do you cocoon yourself in a little dark room with a little tiny desk light, or do you pick stuff out on your iPad, and do you do it at night? Do you do it during the day? What's your actual process for writing?
What I get up early. I'm an early riser, and I work out, and then I get my cup of decaf green tea,
Uh,
usually a little snack, and I sit down at my computer and I review what I had written the previous day, make little edits, which I know you're not supposed to do.
who
It's
says?
well, you read like these, how to write, and they say don't go back and edit,
Ah,
don't the whole thing. I'm like,
phooey,
yeah.
whatever.
But anyway, so that's what I do, and then I just write for a couple hours. If I'm writing a memoir like I did with Ava, um, it's a lot easier because I have my notes there,
Oh,
so I
sure.
can, the story just moves along, as you know from your writing. Fiction, you have to think a little bit more, of
Yeah,
course, and your creative process has to go. But there's a lot more freedom in writing fiction
yeah,
because you make it up. I mean, you have to do, as we said, you have to do your research, but the characters live in your head, and they're kind of dictating the story to you.
yeah.
So I do
After,
that for a couple hours every
so
day.
do you write every single day until you're done, or do you take a
uh,
break sometimes, or what?
it depends. During the pandemic I wrote every day, but then life got back to normal. I don't have quite as much time. I try to write every morning. I try to do something with my writing every day. Uh, Generally, I don't do well in the afternoons
Yeah,
because my
me either.
brain works better in the morning.
Yeah.
So,
Do you do an outline first, or do you just sit down and you do write a story linearly from beginning to end?
yeah, I am not an outliner.
Yeah, me either.
I wrote a short story, a Halloween kind of story, just the other day, and I had it all plotted out in my head. And I got about three-quarters of the way through, and my characters are like, no, 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 that's not what happened.
Uh,
And the story just changed. So,
yeah, I just I love just starting with an idea and I say, okay, I start writing. I don't even really think it through. I just start I vomit stuff onto the page. I just get it out there. And then I walk away and come back and either it sucks or it doesn't suck. If it doesn't suck, I continue. And then I kind of like writing from beginning to end and just kind of seeing where the characters go and where the story goes. It's funny how that happens when you start crafting characters and these in fiction anyway, these fake people. It's like you kind of get a feeling for, okay, this should happen next and then this should happen next. I'm surprised by that. And that makes it fun for me. Anyway, are you writing, what are you working on now, if anything?
well, I finished a few months ago, I finished another memoir for a financial advisor who I've known his family I've known forever. And he had read What a Trip, and he said, I have a great story. I'd like you to write it. And I wrote all that, and he's put it on the back burner for now. I think he's has some concerns about the people in the book. So
Sure.
that's kind of sitting there. And in the meantime, I am now writing a real memoir. I'm writing my father's story from my point of view.
Well, tell us real quick, what about your father? Did he have an interesting past or?
Oof, yeah. My father's a Holocaust survivor.
Ah,
Well, his family is. And so I grew up, I mean, as far as I can remember, I knew it wasn't like my parents hid anything from me, but I knew about all this. So I'm just writing, and he's deceased, unfortunately, but I'm writing from my memory, and I'm writing about him as I remember him and just taking it through. And there's a lot of surprises, which I
wow.
don't want to put any spoilers in.
Yeah, good. I'll watch. I'll read that when it comes out. That's so.
Okay.
What's it going to take a year or so to write that? Maybe or longer.
I've got about close to 40,000 words written right now.
Oh,
And
really? Oh,
yeah,
you're
yeah,
well along.
yeah. So I imagine that'll come out, that'll be finished in maybe early. 26.
Okay, cool. All right, so you're working on that. That sounds exciting. The I was also interested in there's so much dialogue in Looking for Love, like lots of dialogue. That I'm assuming a lot of that is you recreated it based on what Ava told you. Is that fair? I
Yes.
mean, she couldn't have remembered word for word all those conversations, right?
No. Yeah, I think dialogue is a great way to move the story
Oh, hell
along.
yes.
Yeah. And that's with her, that was easy. A story, for example, like with my father's story, I'm struggling with the dialogue
Hmm,
because of just the nature of,
sure.
of how it is. But yeah, I think dialogue, because you're showing, you're not telling, you're having the characters really kind of
Well, it
mold.
totally flushes out the characters, of course, right? When you hear the
Yeah.
way they speak and what they say. um, yeah, the very first book I wrote was a nonfiction book about a story I was involved in, and I recreated about 80% of the conversations there, but it was fairly recent, and all those folks were still alive, and I actually was there for a lot of those conversations, so it was a little easier to do. And let's talk about where to find you online. You have a website,
I do.
susanedwardsauthor.com. Susan with an E, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the thing about that is you're very easy to find on the internet because I think you're the only one.
Well, I just have a real quick
Yeah,
funny
please.
story. Years ago, my husband and I were down in Washington, D.C., and we're walking around Georgetown. Um, and I see a sign on the street. It says Mrs. Susan Psychic Reader, and it was Susen. I'm like, I got to go to this woman. So, so we go upstairs. She had an apartment, and I go in, and I said, "You spell your name the same as I do." She says, "Oh, that was a typo."
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
So
so who named you Susen? Was that how you, or is that your birth name?
I changed it.
You
I
changed it?
changed it.
Well, good move because you know how many Susan Susan Edwards there are in the internet?
A lot.
1 gazillion. You do social media also?
I'm on Facebook. I'm active on Facebook. I have an Instagram and a LinkedIn account, which I don't do a lot with.
Gotcha. Well, folks, the book you want to really pay attention to is Looking for Love. This is the last book that, the most recent book that Susan's written. I just finished it. It's really well written. It's written in my style. Lots of lots of short declarative sentences. The writing is completely unambiguous. I mean, it sucks, even though this woman's story is just so horrific, it sucks you in because of a combination of the writing style, the dialogue, the absolute intrigue of how many bad things can happen to one person, either through their own doing or through bad luck, which I think is was the combination that worked against her. But she comes out clean on the other side, and good for her.
Yeah.
Susan Edwards with an E. I appreciate you being with me here. I wish you lots of luck, and thanks for being with me.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's been a pleasure.